Hey, welcome to Just Cook with Michael. Today, after watching this video, you're going to learn how to make a traditional Portuguese bread from the Madeira Islands. This bread is omnipresent throughout the island ever since I was a kid. A lot of Portuguese festivals, you see it everywhere. I've been to the island a few times. Almost every restaurant, if there's bread on the table, it's this kind of bread. They actually sell it quite often on the streets where they're cooking it to order and finishing it up with either butter or garlic butter. Bolo means bread, so it's kind of like a little cake. And Caco means a broken piece of ceramic. Back in the old days, or even sometimes still today, it's traditionally cooked like on a pizza stone. Or imagine, 100 years ago, everyone had indoor fire burning ovens, and so it was cooked on this ceramic, which quite often was cracked due to the heat. So for the bowl of coffee, we have some bread flour. This is a high gluten flour. The King Arthur flour, bread flour, is 12.7% gluten. Regular all-purpose flour is more like 9%, so this is a great flour to use. You can get away with all-purpose, but I highly recommend getting a bread flour. It's going to have some salt, yeast, and a sweet potato. This is a white sweet potato. Mini potatoes like a russet would work really well. You're basically going to cook the potatoes till they're fairly soft and mash them up, and then that gets incorporated into the dough. It keeps your bread moist because potato starch retains water well. In addition, potato starch inhibits gluten development, so it does make the bread a little more tender. So like all bread recipes, it does take time. It takes time for gluten development. Okay, first step is just peeling the potatoes like you would any other potato. I'm going to provide the recipe card throughout the video, and I highly recommend, if you're going to be making large quantities of this, if you're having some kind of family event, to go with the metric system and use a digital scale. It's just much easier. The size isn't that important with your cut because you are going to be mashing these up. Okay, our water is boiling. There's no need to add salt to the boiling water right now because we're going to salt the bread later, and that way we have the exact amount of salt that's needed. Most recipes, if you consider the total weight of the flour being 100%, the salt is usually somewhere between 1 to 2.5%. We'll dump our potatoes in there. Okay, the potatoes have been cooking for about 10 minutes. Again, I already could tell it just goes right through the potato. It easily goes through, it's already breaking apart. You want it to be fairly tender like that. It's easier just to mash up. All right, now we will mash up the potatoes, or sweet potatoes. I'm making the 4-cup recipe. And you just kind of want to mash them up into a smooth mashed potato consistency. So I have my potatoes all mashed up into a fine paste. And now I'll put in my warm water. It's around 105 degrees. For the quantity of bread I'm making today, I will need 1 teaspoon of yeast. And these yeast are dehydrated. So when you mix in your dry yeast into the water, the water should be about 105 to 115 degrees. The optimal temperature once you have introduced the yeast to the flour is between 80 and 90 degrees Fahrenheit. And gluten is made out of 2 other proteins that combine to make it gluten. The first one is glutenin, and the second one is gliadin. When those 2 proteins come together, they make gluten. The only way that happens is in the presence of water. So as soon as you add flour to water, those 2 proteins are going to come together to form gluten. Just sitting there, they'll start to form gluten, even without any kneading. Right now, it's the potato, the mashed up potato water slurry that's fairly warm. I put in my yeast. You want to let it rehydrate for 5 to 10 minutes. Okay, the next step in the process is what they call autolyse. This is where you just combine the water and flour. And once you introduce water to flour, it'll start making gluten. The other thing autolyse does is it allows all the water to be fully absorbed into each grain of flour. This process can be anywhere from 30 minutes to like 2 hours. So the longer you do it, the less kneading or pulling and folding you need in the future, because again, it's just adding to gluten development. But when you start working with the dough 30 minutes to 3 hours from now, it's already much more supple and easier to work with. So Our potato slurry is here with the water and the yeast. No salt is added yet. So I am just using a chopstick here. So I've been stirring this up. There's still some dry flour, what I mean that's not incorporating in, so I think it needs just a little more water. Again, especially when working not in metric or weighing out the ingredients, sometimes depending on the humidity in your house or in the environment, the flour might have more or less water. And also some flours, depending on how you pack them into a measuring cup, if you pack them really hard, you're going to get more flour. If you pack it lightly, less flour. So this is kind of like where the art of bread making comes in. So I am going to add 2 tablespoons to this 4-cup recipe. To me, it just seems like it needs a little more water. And it's hard to add water in later. It's a little easier if this came out to be like too wet. And this will be, you want it to be a little sticky. But if it came out too wet, it's usually easier just to work in flour as you're doing stretch and folds later. So just to give you an idea how this is coming together, it does form a ball. It's slightly sticky. Definitely no gluten development. You see how now if I try to do what they call the window pane test, it just falls apart. As we go through this process, the gluten will develop. Those 2 proteins will come together to form gluten, and also by doing stretching and pooling, you're going to elongate the glutens and strengthen it. We will just let this sit anywhere from 30 minutes to like 3 hours. Okay, our dough has now gone through the autolyse process. It's a good idea to have a little note card with you, I think, when making bread. So I started the autolyse at 10 a.m. It's about 11 a.m. now, so this has gone for about an hour. And I had it covered with some plastic wrap and a towel. You can see it's a little more pliable. Here it is here. It's a little more stretchy, but still breaks apart. Not that much gluten development yet. And what we're going to do now, it should be a little sticky. Remember, for that 4-cup recipe, I actually added about 3 tablespoons more of water just because I felt it was a little too dry. And this feels good. It's still, it definitely feels tacky. It doesn't feel really dry. You don't want it to be really dry at all. And again, I think if a dough is a little overhydrated, that's better than underhydrated, because you always could work in more flour. That's a little easier than working in more water. We're ready to go through what they call the stretch and fold. We're going to do this for sure 3 times and up to 4 times. And basically this is a process where we're going to stretch out the dough, fold it back on top of itself. And this is to develop gluten, to lengthen those strands of gluten. Anywhere from 30 minutes to 2 hours between the folds. You don't have to baby over it. And we didn't add in the salt yet, so I'm going to do that now. I'm going to do this stretch and fold in the bowl. You can do this, like if you had a whole bunch, you could put it on your granite countertop also and do the stretch and fold however you like. So we're going to work in the salt. This is where it's nice to use granulated salt just because it disperses easier than something like kosher. For the stretch and fold, you're just grabbing it and folding it over itself, kind of grabbing it from the bottom, folding it over itself. Grabbing it, folding it over itself. So do that a number of times. I could tell the dough gets a little tighter when you do that. So again, throw that back in my bowl. You basically put the plastic wrap over it so it doesn't develop a skin, and also to retain the moisture that's in there. Cover this. So that was the first one. I'll mark that down on my note at 11 a.m. I did my first stretch and fold, and we'll have for sure 2 more, maybe 4 more. The last step will be to shape it into the little bun shape and to let it proof for about 2 hours until it doubles in size before we cook it. Okay, we did our first fold. We're on our second fold. Take off the towel. Okay, it's 1 o'clock. It's been about 2 hours since the last fold. 4 hours since I added the flour to the water. But you can see here that the dough is starting to rise. We'll do another fold. So we're just pulling from the bottom, folding over the top, pull from the bottom. So again, I'll put this in my bowl, cover it with saran wrap, and then wait for sure 30 minutes and up to like 2 or 3 hours. You really can't overproof it. I mean, you can overproof it, but not in this time range. So that's it. Go about your day, get stuff done, get back to it whenever you can. It's been about 4 hours since we introduced the flour to the water slurry potato mixture. let's say the gluten development, it's definitely rising some more. And also after that second fold, you could easily put that in the refrigerator overnight. So say if you wanted to make bread like around lunchtime, you could do this process up to the second fold, where you have all the ingredients, the salt's in there, put it in the refrigerator overnight. That cool temperature will really slow down the yeast and fermentation tremendously. And then the next day when you pull it out, just bring it out to room temperature for at least an hour and do your third, and if needed, your fourth fold. Okay, here's our dough. The gluten's developing, trying to do the window test. It's still tearing a bit, so not quite fully developed. But again, we'll do the stretch and fold techniques. So just pull it out, stretch it over itself, pull, stretch over itself. Do this about 10 times. Okay, that's it. We'll let it rest again anywhere from 30 minutes to 3 hours, and then get to our last fold. To me, it still feels like it needs some more gluten development, so we'll get to our last fold, and then it'll be the final proofing, shaping and proofing of the dough. Okay, now we're on our fourth stretch and pull technique. You can see the dough has been rising again. It definitely feels more pliable, definitely has a softer feel to it. And one last time. Again, do this about 10 times, or you stretch it and just fold it over itself. That's the fourth stretch and fold. So again, this could rest anywhere from a half hour to 3 hours, and we'll just let it rest. After that, I'll divide the dough in two and shape it into our final stage before proofing. Okay, it's been 6 hours since we introduced the water to the flour. Now the next step is going to be to shape the dough, to roll it out in little balls. What I like to do is I like to use these paper plates. You could use a pie pan to shape it, because once it sits here and proofs for anywhere from about an hour to 2 hours, you're going to put it in a cast iron pan or some kind of frying pan. Because cut this to shape. The parchment paper, I like to do it just because it's less of a chance it's going to stick to the paper or to a pie pan. You also just could grease a pie pan and sprinkle some flour on it, so you get a non-stick that way. Definitely has a nice spring to it. It's still tacky, which is good. You definitely, if anything, this feels a little dry to me, but you definitely want the dough to be tacky. And you can see I could start to make a little what they call window pane to do the window test where it's translucent. That is definitely the stage you want to get to. To do this all in one day is kind of a long process, but if you do it up to that second fold the day before and put it in the refrigerator overnight, it really breaks it up. And it's harder to overproof. So this has been 6 hours. I mean, easily, could go another 3. So I would highly recommend, the night before or during the day before, do the procedure up to that second fold where you've already introduced the salt, and then just put it in your refrigerator overnight. It could be anywhere from up to 24 hours. Then the next day, bring it out, and within an hour, you're ready to go. You'll notice the dough will be very soft and easy to work with, and it just kind of makes the process easier because it's easier to work with a dough that has great gluten development. Sprinkle a little flour on here. So I want to get about 3 even pieces. Now we're just going to shape this in kind of almost think of it as a thick pizza. You want to get it to about anywhere from 8 to 10 inches. You can use a rolling pin or a dowel to get it to that desired shape. All right, our dough is shaped. It's about 8 inches in diameter. Now we're going to let it proof for about 1 to 2 hours. It'll be covered to prevent it from forming a skin so it could get some rise from the fermentation. And that'll be it. From that point, we'll just transfer it over onto a hot skillet. Okay, the bread has been proofing for about 1.5 hours. From the time I mixed the flour and water together, it's been about 6.5 hours. And the bread looks nice. It feels really light and fluffy. Now we'll just put it in the pan. You can't, if you're doing a whole bunch of these, You can start them in the pan, flip them, and then when they're a little golden on both sides, put them in the oven and finish if you don't have enough stovetop space. So I will put just a little bit of oil in the pan. Now I'll introduce my first loaf. The second one is on the parchment. Once the bread has been in the pan for about 2 minutes, you could reduce the heat to more of a medium-low temperature. Okay, it's been about 5 minutes on one side. I'll flip it over. And now I'm turning down the heat to a very low level, one of the lowest settings. Okay, I flipped over the bread again. It's been about 6 minutes on each side. And again, you do want this bread to be fairly thin, anywhere from about 3/4 of an inch, I would say, to 1.5 inches at the thickest, mainly because you're cooking it, on a really hot surface. If it's too thick, it's going to take too long to cook all the way through, and you'll get more hot spots like that. But traditionally, it does kind of look like, again, like a thicker, fluffier pizza crust. And I'll check this internal temperature. That is at 205. That is also at 206, so these are done. I'll pull these off. Thanks for joining me today on Just Cook with Michael. Now you can make the Portuguese traditional bread from the island of Madeira. Now go out and cook for someone you love.